Yeah, we are. Yes, we are. Rachel with an EL.
Hey, Jill's here. Hey, Jill.
Mm. Oh, you've got the.
In. Look at all these people joining us. Julie, Elise,
It'll
Teresa.
be interesting to see if there are a lot more women than men.
Yeah, it would be.
It just occurred to me because we usually have I think, a good mix.
I see David on there, David Hamilton. I see one man.
David Hamilton, I think, wins an award, right, Adria?
Yeah, he does. David, we thank you for joining all the time.
Because I think he's been here every single time.
Oh, Joyce Porter. Hey, Joyce.
Mm-hmm.
Roxana.
Where can we find this on Facebook?
Acting Studio Chicago.
Yep.
Just on our Facebook page.
Oh, just on your page?
I would think, yeah. And then
if I share it?
You should be able to share it, like, what are they called? Watch parties.
Ooh.
Some people have done that.
I'm definitely having a party right now, everyone. So,
are you?
Yeah.
Party house, party house.
Yep, I'm feeling the party.
Thank you, David. Yes, there was. Thank you, Joyce.
Back again.
It was really nice of the Chicago Actors Film Meetup to share this with everybody.
Thank you, CAFM.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'm going to just start so I don't take up too much of your time since you have so many questions and this is such an amazing topic. And we are so thrilled to have these two talented women with us tonight. So thank you. Thank you for joining us, everyone. I'm Rachel Patterson. I'm the director of Acting Studio Chicago. Thank you for coming tonight. And if this is your first time here, or you've been to maybe one of the webinars in the past, but you're curious about some of the topics that we have covered, you can go to our website, actingstudiochicago.com. And under the Biz tab at the menu at the top, you can pull down and it says webinars. And we have a page where we have recordings of all of our past webinars for you to look at. Last week, we covered CineSpace, which was really interesting. And tonight we have Tonia Sina, who is an intimacy director and intimacy coordinator, and Adria will introduce her and you'll talk to her, but she is considered the godmother of intimacy. So we are very excited to have the godmother with us. And we also have the lovely Rachel Flesher, who works both in live performance as a intimacy director, and I know has also done quite a bit of film and television as a coordinator. So it'll be interesting to hear the differences, if there are any really, in those two practices. So thank you, Adria. Great job as always. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks with Charles Andrew Gardner as the host with some surprise guests. So I look forward to watching this conversation. Thank you, everyone. And take it away, Miss Adria.
I'm going to take it away. Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome.
So, yeah, thank you guys for joining us tonight. Hey, everybody, welcome to Jammy Jam episode 16, Let's Get Intimate. These ladies help actors do their best work by creating safe, supportive environments for intimate scenes on stage and on camera. I think that's so great. I'm so excited that they're both here tonight. I'm excited to learn from both of you ladies, as I'm sure you guys watching are, about this important work and also how they're handling intimacy, directing, and coordinating during COVID-19. So again, thanks you guys for joining us. I will start with my intros. I'm going to start with Tonia Sina. Did I say that right?
Tonia, like Antonia.
Tonia.
Without the Ann.
Yeah, you guys, it's Tonia, okay? Help me out if I say it wrong. Anyway, as Rachel said, she is called the godmother of the whole intimacy movement. She's choreographed intimacy for the Stratford Festival in Ontario, Canada, Chicago Lyric Opera, and Steppenwolf, to name a few. She's an international sexual harassment prevention advisor for theater, opera, and film. She has been featured everywhere, you guys. I'm researching both these ladies and it's like, I'm talking like New York Times, LA Times, Huffington Post, Washington Post, Cosmopolitan, American Theater Magazine, a million podcasts. I could go on and on. She's an international intimacy for the stage workshop teacher and choreographer. She's originally an actress, fight director, and movement teacher. She now advises universities on their curricula to help prevent harassment and abuse in academia, which I love that. She attended Niagara University for her BFA in theater performance and Virginia Commonwealth University, where she earned her MFA in movement pedagogy with a specialty in intimacy. Wow, thank you so much for taking the time really to be here with us in this hour.
Thank you for having me and Rachel.
Yeah. Okay, so let's hear about Rachel, you guys. Are you ready? I'm ready. She's an intimacy director for theater, an intimacy coordinator for film, as well as an intimacy educator. She's also a SAG-AFTRA stunt performer, a certified fight director and instructor with the Fight Directors of Canada. She's an actor, a teaching artist. She's currently helping to lead the industry to make safer sets around the world, including the SAG-AFTRA Intimacy Initiative and the MEAA. What's MEAA?
That is the stage management, a stage management guild.
Excellent. Now we know that. Okay, so she helps, she's doing that work by helping produce the best practices and procedures in multiple areas for film and TV. Intimacy direction and fight direction credits include the Goodman Theater, Steppenwolf Theater, Shakespeare Dallas, Writers Theater, to name a few. You can see her intimacy coordination on Glow, season 3, I love Glow, The Red Line, Never Have I Ever, as well as a lot of other TV and film shows. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I was talking to them earlier, you guys, and I'm just like really feeling the multi-hyphenate, the multi-hat wearer in both of you. I really, you know, I salute the multi-hat wearer in me, salutes the multi-hat wearers in both of you. We'll talk about how all that happens in a second. But I want to start with, back in the beginning of when all this started. Tonia, I'm going to get your name right. Take us back to when you were getting your master's in college, okay? And I read that you coined the phrase intimacy choreographer in your thesis paper. And looking back to that moment in time, did you ever think that the work you were doing would be so groundbreaking and become what it is today? Uh-oh. Can you guys hear her?
I was muted, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, so tell me.
No, not at all. Never. I was 26 years old when I wrote my thesis.
Wow.
And I really was I was very, very young. They even called me baby grad. I had a lot of really big ideas and a lot of big wants and asks that I felt a lot of people had, but no one really had a solution for. We all knew there were issues with how these scenes were done. And way back in that time, when we're talking early 2000s, there were a lot fewer women around that were in charge as far as directors and people higher up, especially in academia. So, and most of my experience had been in community theaters and academia at that point, but I had experienced a lot of really horrible choreography situations with intimacy. So I really wanted to solve the problem for me and my productions. I'd never thought this was going to be an international movement, but I did know that there were things that were wrong that needed to be fixed, and I could no longer allow the actors that I'm working with, that I'm in charge of, that I'm supposed to be keeping safe, to be abused in front of me anymore. So at that point, I was just like, okay, well, I'm going to create a technique.
Yeah.
After I learned there was no person in the world doing this work, that I was like, surely somebody has come up with this, nobody really had. So I was like, great, well then I will come up with my own technique, and that's what my thesis will be about. And over the 3 years, I realized what a big gaping hole this was in the industry. Wow. And how much more work I was going to have to do to make that technique sound. Because coming out of grad school, it's like, well, I had this idea, but I really needed years and years to perfect it.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad that you made that happen. I think we all are.
Me too.
Rachel, you were sharing with us before we went live about how you guys know each other. Can you talk about what led you to intimacy work, and can you share your story about how you both connected?
Yes, I had the amazing opportunity to work with Tonia at my undergrad, and she was my movement instructor, and the second she said intimacy director, I was hooked. And the things that she taught in her classes really inspired all of my interest in my undergrad work. I was already an avid fight person, and seeing another woman in the fight industry was really inspiring because I hadn't really met many other women in the fight industry at that time. And also to see someone just so unabashedly speak about what it's like to be a woman in academia, it was very inspiring to me. And so I fell in love with my stage combat mix with the trauma research I was doing, and kind of started doing this intimacy work, which was stunning.
Yeah, great, great. Tonia, I'm researching you both, and I read about your battle with your health and being diagnosed with kidney failure at 19. And I mean, you're just really inspiring. I mean, how do you remain motivated despite dealing with multiple transplants and all? I can't imagine.
Well, there were years where I took it slow. There were some, I feel like, part of me is like, if I hadn't been sick, maybe this would have happened faster. But I had a lot of struggles while I was living in Oklahoma, and health was just one of those struggles. And things were kind of piling up. I felt like the motivation to make things better for other people was really what motivated me, was that this is something that is so important that if I don't live long enough for this to be, fixed, I want to spend the rest of my life trying to fix it because of what I'd seen. And growing up in an abusive home and then being in an abusive marriage, all of that was kind of sewn into the work, and my health situation also, being disabled and having a perspective of a disabled person in the theater where nothing is accommodating for you. And, at first it was like, if you have a disability, you keep that to yourself. You don't tell anybody you have one, especially if it's invisible. Now it's something that we can just say, no, these are my needs. I have boundaries. They're different from your boundaries because I'm disabled. And so that eventually became translation for the pillars that we have today, was that every person has individual boundaries, and being disabled doesn't mean you can't do the work.
Yeah.
So it all really was motivated to move forward, if anything.
Awesome. Awesome. You know what, you talked about the pillars. I'm going to pull up and screen share this worksheet right now. Hang on one second. So yeah, let's talk about technique, you guys. I was reading the transcripts from Tonia's entrance podcast that you did, and you said the big secret is that this is an acting technique. It's acting intimacy for the stage, which is the technique that I invented, but it's an acting technique. Intimacy choreography is the movement, the movement to make this a specialty. But when I teach performance, I'm teaching an acting class. And for me, I love that it centers on acting. Can you guys sort of walk us through the pillars and talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, so the pillars are up on everybody's screen, I hope, and you could see them. Essentially, these are the foundational document for all of the intimacy directors that come from our branch, with intimacy directors and coordinators in the IDI branch of intimacy. This is essentially a list of, this is the summary. We have much more in-depth rules, obviously, for specifics, but essentially it starts with their 5 C's: context, consent, communication, choreography, and closure are the 5 pillars. So essentially, and it would take a whole hour to actually get into the depth of all of them, so I'll just breeze through it. Context is, you need to have a story before you can tell any sort of intimacy on stage. We have to understand what it is and agree to it. The consent is, everything must be enthusiastically consented to. And the intimacy director helps facilitate consent because there's less coercion when you have an intimacy direction. If you have a director trying to choreograph very graphic intimacies, sometimes there can be some coercion involved. It's hard to say no to somebody who's paying your bills, and it's hard to say no in the power dynamics that we understand theater has. So consent has to be part of this process. Communication is, we need to be talking constantly about what we're feeling, what we need, making sure we're expressing boundaries, understanding that actors need to know their own boundaries and to be able to express them. We want a free-flowing environment in the rehearsal hall, a joyful rehearsal hall. And then choreography is when you finally actually set the choreography, which has to be repeatable every day. Every time you do it, it must be the same, and we can't, you know, deviate from other things. It has to be what we set, because that's the contract, and that's what we agreed to. And then closure is how we walk away from the work and are able to be ourselves again, so that you don't take that into your life all the time, and that you don't fall in love with every partner you have.
Great. Sorry, Rachel, I think I muted you. Sorry about that. We had a little reverb there. Okay, great, great. So yeah, you guys, I was showing that sheet as she was talking about it. I bet you could go on for like an hour just on each one of these.
There's a lot. Every single one of the pillars has notation underneath it, and every single one of those things is a response to something that we saw, experienced, or something that happened to us that needed a rule set.
Okay, thank you. I want to talk about now, so this was with IDI that the pillars are started with. I want to talk now about the work with SAG-AFTRA and the guidelines that have been created. I'm going to pull up the standard protocols for the use of intimacy coordinators in here. Rachel, do you want to talk about this, or?
I'm sure. It's there's quite a few, and it's an ongoing process, but SAG-AFTRA has been working with Alicia Rodas, who is the head intimacy coordinator at HBO, and also the first intimacy coordinator, and she is also the intimacy coordinator for The Deuce. She and a group of intimacy coordinators who are also SAG-AFTRA members, I myself am a SAG stunt performer, got together, and we wanted to have a list of things that made intimacy coordinators able to work, and also to give people an idea of what an intimacy coordinator does, since we are such a new job and position. So we've got protocols for intimacy coordinators, we've got the expectations that people have for their intimacy coordinators, and though every intimacy coordinator is slightly different, these are the things that SAG has helped build and support. We're very thankful for their support in all of this, and it is an ongoing process, the Intimacy Initiative.
Yeah.
And I encourage everyone to check it out and check into the Intimacy Initiative and have a more comprehensive read through.
Yeah, it's actually, it's really cool to read, just actually how much is in here. So great. All right, so you guys, yeah, that's at SAG-AFTRA's website. Let me see here. Okay, so in your opinions, either one of you, what are the biggest differences between directing intimacy for the stage versus intimacy for on-camera projects? Or are there really?
There are big differences in doing stage and screen work. The timeline comes to mind as the #1 thing, but there's also just a totally different culture and on-set awareness that you have to work in an on-set environment.
Mm-hmm.
In the theater, we often get a lot more time, and we can move at the speed of trust in a slower speed, as I like to say. So people can get to know each other if we're lucky. Now, this isn't every case, but usually we get a bit more time. With theater or with film, when you're intimacy coordinating, you really have to know the inner workings of production meetings and producers and directors and first ADs, and who to go to for what type of thing is happening on set. And then you also have to know actor conversations, and you have to get people very comfortable with each other, or at least get them in a place where they feel confident setting their boundaries and upholding them very quickly. So other than just the structural differences, which are vast, it's also a very different job when it comes to working with power dynamics and celebrity, and you never know what you're going to walk into that day on set. You may have 50 partially unclothed extras that need going through that you've never met, versus having a rehearsal at all. So
yeah. Yeah, wow. I can imagine it's very different. I'm always like, you know, as an actor, and I know you guys watching can relate, it's like you get so much more time with theater usually just to prepare. versus on-camera projects. So that makes sense. So Rachel, sort of going along with, you know, your look into TV film versus on stage, I read that you're really busy. You have something like 17 plus TV shows and counting right now you're working on. I mean, that's incredible. Can you talk about how you approach each project? Any kind of breakdown you do, or what does that look like?
Sure. So first of all, I've been very lucky to be very busy. This last year was really the first year that intimacy coordination for film started taking off more. So there was a very high demand for intimacy coordinators and getting to know what the job is. But the 17 shows doesn't necessarily reflect doing like 17 theater projects. As we talked about, a timeline for on set could be me being there for one day, or a day plus a prep day, or it could be me being there for the entire run of a season, but that doesn't mean I'm necessarily on set every day.
Right.
So that's how that volume kind of built up. But also when it comes to my preparation for projects, each one is different, and I like to treat each one as an individual. Obviously, there are protocols and procedures, the intimacy protocols and procedures that I like to follow and go through in the same way, but that doesn't mean that every director works the same, and that doesn't mean every actor works the same. So the goal is to help uplift the director's vision, to make sure that the actors are enthusiastically and ongoingly in consent throughout their work process, which looks very different for every different actor. And then also to make sure that I myself am able to support the actors in the way that they want me there on set. So that can be in my movement coaching, that someone might want support in learning how to make an orgasm sound that maybe they've never done that outside of the context of their own lives, and they want some tips for that. But maybe that actor just wants me available on set to know that they have someone or something to come up or to happen. So really my job is to meet them where they are, and that prep is very individual to each project and the project's needs.
Cool, thank you.
Okay.
Tonia, I'm really kind of, I want all of our watchers to really, I'm just impressed with your journey, and I want to share that with them. So much of acting is not giving up, right? You guys, it's like, keep on, keep going, move forward. And as part of your journey, I read that you were the only intimacy director in the world for almost 10 years. Did I read that right? And then can you talk about what it was like being on that solo road, and maybe what really happened to make it kind of go, okay, more help, more people?
Yeah. Yeah. So at first it was just, I have this great idea. And a lot of people were like, that's a great idea. And the majority of people were like, that'll never take off. And really? So
haters, you guys, ignore the haters.
A lot of people were, I was actually told by my mentors that I was naive to even think that this might even possibly ever be a thing.
Wow.
And so I was like, okay, great. That's actually what I need to fuel me to do it more. So I was, I graduated in 2006, and from 2006 to about 2014, I know, like, there really wasn't, I actually met another person. My first person who I met who was doing this research was Chelsea Pace. And I met her in 2014, and she was majoring, she was writing her thesis on intimacy at that point. And I was like, oh my gosh, another person. And, I was like, I was trying to get in touch with anybody I could talk to who I knew was doing this work. And then Adam Noble crossed my path, and he was doing it for almost as long as I was, but he wasn't calling it intimacy. So I was essentially just trying to find people who were like-minded, at least in the understanding that we wanted a safe environment in the rehearsal hall, and that it currently wasn't safe. And that's where we started from. Once I started finding people who not only agreed with me, because a lot of the actors I worked with were like, yeah, obviously this is a no-brainer. It was once I started talking to people who wanted to do the work with me, or wanted to train to be an intimacy choreographer like me, then it was like, okay, I need to figure out how I'm going to train people to do this. How am I going to mentor them you know, I have to make sure the technique has a, you know, a more solid base before I can do that. So really it was workshopping for about 10 years and sort of shielding naysayers as we go and like just sort of bouncing off anybody that's like, this is stupid. Okay, just keep going. And I definitely lost faith a couple of times. I almost gave up right around 2013. When I had my second kidney transplant, I almost gave up. I was like, if I can't get this to take off, then this is it. And that was when I started teaching national workshops at Stage Combat workshops in intimacy. And one of my colleagues, Siobhan Richardson, invited me to Toronto, where I taught a workshop there. She invited a journalist who watched it, wrote an amazing article, and that article is what led to the Stratford Festival hiring me.
Great.
So it was sort of a little chain of events that led to this very big event, because then the New York Times covered the Stratford Festival, and it became, everybody heard the word intimacy director at that point. So finding the team was one of the best things I can ever say, because one person screaming into the void is good, but having 3 people scream into the void as a team was exponentially helpful. And then we started rallying an army behind us. And then by then the momentum was starting to go. And then Me Too happened and just pushed us all over the edge. So it was really that wave with our wave met, and there was no stopping it after that point.
Excellent. That's so great. That's a great story. Rachel, I don't know when this was, not that long ago, I read an article with Noah Wiley when they were working on the Red Line here in Chicago. And I remember reading an article about his work, and I think it was with you on that. Let me screen share this article here. But basically he went from thinking intimacy work would be a bunch of BS to actually really singing your praises, which I loved reading about. I mean, I don't know, is this a typical response from you in terms of celebrity? Or, I mean, I just love that he had a total turnaround, a total 180 on it. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. First of all, I loved working with Noah and my experience with the whole if you haven't seen the Red Line, everyone.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And second of all, it's very different. Some actors come in with preconceived notions because they've read something about it. Some people have never heard of it. I think the biggest thing that if I do come up against resistance, it's because someone thinks I'm there to come in and try to change their acting technique, or I'm there and coming in and trying to take away their creativity, or block their process in some way. I think the realization, once actors get to hear me explain my job and the way I like to do my process, they're much more susceptible to the work, because they realize I'm there to meet them where they are and to support them and uplift them. Just like a stunt coordinator is there to show you how to look the strongest you possibly can when you're throwing a punch and keeping you safe and making sure you look realistic and awesome. That's what I'm there to do as a movement coach. If I'm asked to movement coach, I'm there to make sure that things look believable, that you are able to do your work within the boundaries that we've set. So in that way, you can be even more free in your movement. You can be able to just act and just encompass the character, because you're not worried that you're going to cause harm to your scene partner and they're not going to cause harm to you. So it's really a question of, do I get to explain my job, or has someone else explained my job for me for the most part? Other than that, I get a very mixed bag of responses from actors, but working with Noah was absolutely incredible, because we did have a big turnaround.
I mean, I love how humble he is and transparent he is about it. He seems like a great guy. But just in terms of, I think we all have fear when we don't quite know what something is, you know, or we have like a defense mechanism that immediately pops up. And just kudos to you and him being able to be like, oh my God, this is actually wonderful. And he felt great. I remember him talking about saying he was supposed to kiss his husband. And he, you know, he's like, by the time that the camera came on, he just was like so prepared, and it was so easy and all of that. So I thought that was.
I think you're so right, Adria, about fear, and I think Tonia, you can probably speak to this a lot too. We're new in town still. Though we've been here a while, we're still the new kids on the block. And so if you haven't worked with an intimacy director or coordinator, it can be intimidating not knowing what you're stepping into. So making sure that we are all transparent and saying, I'm not here to reinvent your wheel. I'm not here to take away the process from you. I'm just here to offer you support and make sure that you can do your best work.
Yeah, that is great. That's great. Okay, so big COVID, we're in the COVID times. In case you guys don't know or haven't been aware, we're quarantined and we're in COVID times. How has the work changed with the onset of the pandemic, if at all? Is there new protocols in place? What can you talk about that way?
Well, in theater, in live performance, clearly we're not doing anything. We're not touching, we're not getting we're close to intimacy right now. Right. I think the majority of people are now starting to go back to classes and trying to figure out how on earth they're going to teach acting at all. Intimate, let alone intimacy. I feel like it'll be a while before we can come back with real protocols on that, because right now nobody should even be in the same room with anybody. So that's going to make that difficult. And since really we've had a couple of intimacy directors that try to teach intimacy over Zoom, and you can lecture about it. There are lots of information about intimacy that isn't standing up and doing work, but it's very difficult to demonstrate anything this way through this media. So I think eventually down the line we will come back to having theater again. So we're going to have even better boundaries set of, when we are going to kiss, we're going to have a lot of discussions before it, when that's going to happen, how that's going to happen, how many times it's going to happen, and how, what is the facilitating that is going to be very, very careful, more careful than it ever has. And it really should have been careful all along, and it usually isn't. It's like, hey, I don't know, just kiss them, try something, is usually how it used to go. So now it's going to be, okay, we're gonna have to be checking symptoms, we're gonna have to be checking temperatures, we're gonna have to be making sure that we're masked all the time and away from each other. So I don't see we're probably gonna have to cut corners by telling stories off stage, by telling intimacy stories from across the room, or stylized, or, for us, the way that our method goes, we always say, breathe and pivot. When something is wrong and you don't know how to fix it, I think that's Alicia's, that you breathe, don't freak out, breathe, we have a new boundary, we have to figure out how to fix it, and then pivot and come up with a new idea and just keep moving forward. Because the whole base of the method is that each person has their own individual boundaries. Now we just have an added boundary that no one's allowed to really kiss or touch at all. Okay, well, how can we still tell the story of love and intimacy without being able to touch? Can we tell that story that way? Sure we can, we just have to be creative, right? And luckily we have choreographers that are specialists, that are creative, that can come up with really, really creative ways to tell that story that don't involve the traditional, conventional ways of just graphic sex scenes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You mentioned, I have a question from Sylvie Sedar. She was wondering about taking classes for intimacy in Chicago. Do you guys, I know you mentioned Zoom. Is there a way for actors to get on that list, or are you going to pick it up when it's clearer?
IDC is offering online classes constantly. And so you don't have to be in Chicago to do that. Right now, since we can't meet in a room anywhere to do intimacy, like I would love to be teaching intimacy right now in Chicago. I would love that. But as of right now, since we can't do anything really in person, we are doing online seminars. And if there is a lot of interest that you want something specific, we should give you our contact information and Rachel's contact information so that we can offer those things, because we can only offer what we know people want. And so right now, you know, Rachel and I are both teaching different seminars for IDC. And I think we had a couple, one was on intimacy and COVID. I think one was on intimacy or consent for minors. And I think I'm teaching one next week with my colleague, Doug Schultz-Carlson, on intimacy in opera, which is its own,
Oh, wow.
its own thing.
Yeah.
So we are constantly offering different ones, but if there's anything specific, or if anybody's got like a theater that wants their whole theater company to go to one class about that, you know, and doesn't want like a public one, we can always offer private seminars for anybody who would like that.
Great, great. So we'll get that.
Even for universities.
Us, but yes, universities as well.
Season. So if you have any universities for teachers, there's excellent classes for consent in the classroom that we can offer, and also consent for university students, learning how to state your boundaries and make sure they're upheld in the academic system.
Awesome.
We also guest speak in classes for anybody who's doing Zoom classes online now. If you need a guest speaker and talk about intimacy, we are available for that too.
Excellent, excellent. Rachel, you had mentioned the Safe Way Forward. Why don't we talk about that a little bit? I'll pull that up as well. We mentioned that briefly last week, but let's check it out again.
So Safe Way Forward is a joint report from the DGA, SAG-AFTRA, IATSE, and the Teamsters on COVID-19 safety guidelines to provide workplaces in like a pre-vaccine world. And they're getting ready to release more specific guidelines on intimacy as well. But it's a living, breathing document. So if you are interested in, again, learning more about the SAG Intimacy Initiative, that's on their website. This Safe Way Forward document is incredibly helpful to know your rights. And also, if you have any questions, comments, and concerns that you don't feel like these documents are responding to, feel free to reach out to an intimacy coordinator or your union and ask them, because these are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about in this pre-vaccine world.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Safe Way Forward, I won't go into the whole thing because it's a lot of information, but it's very helpful to know, especially since our very own CineSpace is back up and running. So, which was wonderful to hear about. And so make sure, before you go back to work, to give this a read.
Yeah, absolutely, you guys. It's several pages. I mean, it goes on, but I just think it's really important to just read the whole thing when you get a moment, and you'll have more knowledge that way. So, okay, you guys talked about kissing just not really happening. It sounds like you have so much work to do with theater when it does come back, though. There's a lot of work that's going to have to be done in terms of guidelines and all of that.
Yes, for sure. We're by no means finished with the movement.
Oh, no.
We want to make sure everybody understands that this is not, oh, we fixed it. We fixed the problem. We fixed misogyny and sexism and racism in theater. So now we can just like shut everything down. And no, it's like we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, we're going to be coming back with more energy to fix it, I think, now that we've had this long break to really think about what's been going wrong and how to fix it. And we're going to have to dismantle a lot and then put it back together.
Yeah.
But this is not something that one person can fix. This is not like, hey, one person in your company can come take an intimacy workshop, bring it back to your theater, and it'll be fine. This is a communal effort. Everyone has to be involved in fixing these problems. We are done with abuse in theater and in the performing arts. We're done with it. We cannot support it anymore. We cannot enable it to happen. We cannot watch it happen ever again, because it's done. We're done with that. So it's a matter of the community has to come together to fix this problem.
Yeah, and just kind of going off of what you just said, I can imagine both of you have heard so many stories about artists in which inappropriate behaviors or sexual misconduct has happened during shows. My question is what advice could you give to somebody who maybe isn't feeling protected by where they're working or their partners or the production team? What can they do?
Yeah, everyone is entitled to and deserving to go to work and be treated with respect and with dignity. And that does not there's no difference for actors. I feel like actors have put themselves in a space where they are often so open and willing to be vulnerable that they forget that they deserve the same decency as everyone else.
Yeah.
And I know from my early years, I definitely didn't always think through the decisions I was making when I was making them. It wasn't till after that I felt the abuse had happened.
Mm-hmm.
So in this moment that we have during COVID for right now, the advice that I'm trying to spread is to really take this time that you haven't been around people or necessarily around your work to think about your personal boundaries. Think about them in multiple steps and layers. Think about them under multiple scenarios. Take a bystander intervention class, take an advocacy class. These are ways that you can start to fill yourself up with a toolbox. Take a class on intimacy direction to give you what you need, but also just remember you always have the right to stop something in a moment if it is happening and making you feel unsafe. No one should have to feel unsafe at work.
And that you should always, always, always know the path of reporting wherever you're working. That there should always be a path of reporting. It should be clear, and there shouldn't just be one person to answer to, ever. There should always be multiple paths. If you can't report to this person, you should be able to report to somebody else. And everyone should know that and be transparent about what that process is so that we can be protected.
Yeah, and if you don't know your company's reporting policy, don't be afraid to ask. If they don't have one, that's something they should have. So make sure you ask.
And if they don't have one and they want help, that's also something we do.
Awesome. It seems like, I don't know, there's always sexual abuse cases coming to the surface in the news and all over. Prominent public figures taking advantage of others. I can think of several right now. How does this landscape sort of inform the work that you guys do? Like, I mean, there was a school that had all this stuff happen, and there's a theater in Chicago I could think of, different places. How does that inform what you do?
It all informs it. It's all part of the same problem. And it's not an isolated incidents. That kind of, we hear about some of them, but they're happening everywhere. Even in the companies that are progressive and forward and woke, there are abuses that happen because they're ingrained into the culture of performing arts. That we have allowed ourselves to be abused in this industry for a very long time. So this is not about pointing fingers and telling everyone that they need to go to jail for all the things we've done. If you've done a crime, you should be punished for that. But the culture of theater and in film has been abusive for a very long time. And so, you know, we are all complicit in the culture. And so we can't dismantle it until we all start talking about it and shining lights in the corners, in the darkest corners where the abuse is happening. And it's horrible and it's scary. We say it's like opening a can of worms, and all of a sudden there's going to be worms everywhere. Once you do that, it always gets worse before it gets better, because if you ask for stories of abuse, you are going to get them, because everyone has one. And so you get it all out, and then we can start fixing the problem. You know, really figure out where the problem is and what needs to be done to do it. The only way to do that is for everybody to be honest about their experiences and what's happened to them and how we can move forward. And generationally, you can see the abuse is getting better, like a little bit better. I was abused a lot more than people now, but people before me were abused far worse than I was. Right. So we're all, you know, moving forward together, but we have to keep moving forward until we all understand, you know, that everyone has body autonomy and that nobody has the right to be abused at work or in their life or anywhere.
And I think that culturally, also, if you think back on your life as a whole, there's probably a moment where you were finding yourself pushing in a moment that you shouldn't have been pushing. And that is something that we all have to come to terms with, whether it's a moment that you were enabling racism, whether it was a moment that you were enabling, you weren't protecting someone who you felt like was in a bad situation. Like there are lots of ways for us to be looking into how to be more anti-racist, how to be more, how to shine a lens on our own selves to where we need to move forward as well. Because culturally there is rehabilitation, and it's really important that those who want to be rehabilitated have an opportunity, because that's part of, I believe, what this movement is about as well, is to educate on what consent and bodily autonomy are, and how to make sure that more people are able to speak up for themselves and make sure that their paths forward are clearer.
And to add, to piggyback on that, yes, that is amazing. And yes, we want to make sure people can be rehabilitated, but we also need to be removing people from their positions who have been abusing it for years and years without any consequence. There needs to be consequences for our actions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Great. Tonia, can you talk about IDI, Intimacy Directors International? Had an awesome run. You guys did what you set out to do, and the closing of it, because I know some of our listeners, our watchers are like, what happened? Where do I go now? And it's all on the site, but maybe you can tell us too.
Yeah, so IDI was, it was an attempt by 3 choreographers to start a nonprofit to bring everybody together who was like-minded, and to make intimacy direction a thing, to make this a specialty that was solid, that was defended, that was peer-reviewed, that had a technique that was, you know, teachable, and that we could have a really high bar on who we think should be certified to do this work. Originally, we didn't necessarily want a certification because we knew it was going to be a lot of work for us. But eventually we couldn't just let anybody say they're an intimacy director with us if they were going to be harmful and didn't have enough education. So as we started getting the training program together, we had a lot of growing pains. We were a skeleton crew running an international nonprofit and trying to help Canada, the United States, and Europe incorporate this into their work, while also being boots on the ground and actually choreographing and teaching and mentoring and running the nonprofit. And for some of us also having a lot of health problems. So it just became too much for us. And we realized that the task had been accomplished. And now what we need, instead of trying to convince everybody that this is the right way to go, we know it's the right way to go.
Right.
What we need to do now is come up with a better way of training other people to do this work, and to educate actors and directors and people who don't want to specialize in it but want to incorporate it into what they already do. So we closed IDI for that reason, and that was sort of my step away a little bit from being a leader in this movement. I've kind of taken more of a back seat. Because I've been yelling and yelling and yelling for a long time, and I need to breathe and take care of my body. So I'm allowing the people who've come after me and voices that have not been heard before speak on their experiences, and to allow room for people of color and other voices that need to be heard. People have been listening to me long enough, so it's time for other specialties to spin off the work and talk about more specific situations of how to apply this, and across other specialties. I'm now a part of a company called Intimacy Directors and Choreographers, which Rachel's also a part of. And it's a totally separate organization that is right now building a really solid certification path for people who want to specialize and do this education. And once we come back, we'll be able to do those in person. For right now, some of it will be online. Awesome. But that's in the next phase is going to be, so first one was, hey everybody, this is a thing. And now it's, all right, this is how we do this thing and how we're all going to move forward. And there's other organizations doing similar work. So now we have, it's sort of like, it's not a monopoly. You don't have to come to us. If you don't think this method jives with your method, then there are other ways to approach it. And that's really cool, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when we train, I always say, like, take a little bit of this or take a little bit of this and then put it together, and that's your wheelhouse, you know? Same.
Exactly. That's how this method was formed. It's a little bit of all the people that I learned from, all different methods, wrapped up into my method.
Yeah.
So that's really great, but it might not work for everybody.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. So Rachel, it seems like with shows like Chicago Med and Fire, the trauma of some of its victims and the storylines that they endure, and you know, we as actors, we book those roles. My question is, what they have to portray is pretty intense at times, and with more and more shows coming to Chicago, I think that actors could really benefit from your Traumaturgy. Can you talk to us more about what that is and that work?
Yes, so Traumaturgy, actually, the name was given by the incredible Eric Weiss, who's a Chicago director, also Chicago producer, director for film as well. And Traumaturgy, I brought to her, and I've been researching as a technique for helping actors to portray trauma on screen and on stage, but doing it safely through bodily methods that keep them solidly rooted in character rather than re-traumatizing possible old trauma that they'd have, or building a base or new trauma based off of, you know, say I'm playing a character with PTSD and all of a sudden I start getting some of those nightmares, getting some of that sleeplessness, and I've got a 5-month run of a show. Traumaturgy is built to help ground in actually trauma-informed practices, to make sure that those things don't happen, and also to make sure that people with trauma can come back into the field of acting. Though it's not a form of therapy, it is ways to help with your past trauma, being able to not re-inflame that past trauma, but still be able to work. So paper's coming soon, and I'm really excited about that. Had some time to work on it during COVID. But it's been really wonderful. Like Tonia said, with her work, it's been that now 4 years or so, I almost back at my undergrad actually, so longer than that, of trying things, learning from people, codifying the technique. It takes time. So it's been really wonderful to work with those people, and I'm very lucky to have had some shows pick it up and let me use those techniques with actors, and it's gone very well. Thank
Awesome. You. Yeah, it sounds great. All right, I think I have a question from anonymous attendee. They say, women probably feel more comfortable working with you, I'm guessing, overall. Is there ever more hesitation, uncomfortableness from men when doing a scene, or no?
I can safely say that generally men tend to be actually more nervous than women. That's a very generalized statement, because the expectations on men are different than women, and women are a little more used to being taken advantage of that way. So they have different methods of deflecting. But I find that I actually spend generally, especially if it's a violent sexual scene, if it's a sexual assault, I spend more time with the person perpetrating the choreography than the woman, because generally speaking, the women are okay. It's choreography, they've prepared for it, they have other sort of tools, but to play a rapist is not just a natural thing just because you have a penis. It's not something that's just like, oh, you know how to rape somebody. It's like, no, this is a really emotional place that you have to find how to do. And so I find that all genders are grateful to have somebody that's paying attention to this, because in the past, nobody was asking men what they thought or cared about. It was like, oh, we got to a really pretty girl to kiss, you'll be thanking me later. That's how people used to talk about this. Wow. So now it's like, you know, we're actually trying to have everyone communicate in the room about their boundaries and their weaknesses, and that we're finding that men have had a lot of pressure on them to not say things either. That if something is wrong, that they should be fine with it because you're a man and men love sex and women don't, you know? So it's all of those stereotypes that are negative, that are not true, that have gotten us here. So really, we like to say that men benefit just as much from this work as it's not a woman's movement. It's just not. Yes, statistically speaking, women have been taken advantage of more than men in the industry, if we're going to compare. But everyone has the chances of being assaulted or hurt or harassed, and so we need to make sure everybody knows how to take care of themselves.
I'm thinking of our trans family too, and LGBT.
Absolutely. Even more so with the trans community.
Yeah.
Culturally, there's a very antiquated look at gender and sexuality still in many areas of this work and why it came about. That's one of the things like we get asked a lot, I feel like, is, well, was this a woman's movement? And because it came to light a lot more around the Me Too movement. And the answer I like to give is, this is a response to abuse, and everyone can experience abuse. And so this is a movement to help everyone try to shake off some of those shackles of those stereotypes, be it be on gender or sexuality, or and really talk about just boundaries and meeting someone person to person.
Wonderful. Okay, I have Kat McKay. What's a way the work has carried over into your personal life, if any?
Ooh. In every way, in every single way. I didn't really learn what consent really meant in a relationship until I was maybe 2 years ago. Even though I was teaching consent in the rehearsal hall, I didn't apply it to my real life until way late, because of the way we were taught or not taught about intimacy and sex growing up, you know, and hopefully that changes as we are a little more transparent with our children growing up now about consent. We did not grow up in the age of consent. So, you know, learning about your body is your body and exactly what that means is still tricky, and saying no to somebody is really hard when you have pressure. And so this work has saved my life. It got me out of an abusive marriage. It opened my eyes to the abuse that was happening around me in my job, in my career, in academia. I could see, I was literally surrounded by predators in Oklahoma, and didn't know how close to home that was until I got out. So it's, I think what this work has taught me the most is that abusers are not mean all the time. Abusers are charismatic. They're your friends. They're the people you work with. They are colleagues. They're people you love. They're people you support. They're people all around you, and they don't always know they're being abusive.
Yeah.
So what this has to be about is making sure we're educating everybody on what abuse is and how to avoid it for yourself and the people around you and in your company.
Wow. Man, I thank you both so much. That was the fastest hour.
I probably didn't get to half your questions. I'm sorry.
No, I got to some of them, most of them. But thank you so much for the work that you both are doing. For all of us, I know that everyone watching appreciates you so much. So just thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And also, I just want to say, this is, I think, my 14th Jammy Jam. I had one private and 13 public. It has been an absolute pleasure interviewing folks, for you guys watching. Thank you, Rachel Patterson, for having me. I'm jumping off Jammy Jams for a bit. I may be back, I'm not sure, but I got to figure out online school and all that stuff with the fam. But I just want to leave you with this. I want you to remember it's okay, that's right, to wear your jammies whenever you feel like it. Work those little sleepy eye things. It's okay to wear your jams whenever you freaking want to, okay? Except maybe not at an audition unless you're supposed to wear your jams, okay? But I'm leaving you with that. I'm thanking my husband for being my tech support. And you guys, that is a wrap. Take care.
All right, be safe, everybody.
Yes.
Be safe.